Health, happiness, fulfillment. Health, happiness, fulfillment. Three key things that people want to find and experience in their lives. Health, happiness, and a sense of fulfillment. Everyone wants to be happy. They don't want to go through life unhappy. That makes sense, doesn't it? And so they tend to look for what it is that makes them happy in life and gravitate toward that, seek to realize, experience, manifest, whatever, to make themselves happy. And sometimes we get that wrong as to what it is that will make us happy and achieve or realize, and then it isn't. And then we learn something, and then we go on from there, and we may search some more, and then possibly find new ways and new places to be happy and where it really is. But basically there are principles, spiritual principles, that are designed to take a person into joy and happiness. These principles, if learned and lived, will take you there. So happiness is doable. Get that? Happiness is doable. We can learn that through spiritual principles. We all want to be healthy. And it's quite hard to be happy if we're not healthy. And so an individual who's going through a lot of pain and discomfort and illness a great deal of the time creates an emotional upheaval and discomfort as well. And it can challenge a person not only emotionally but spiritually, their spiritual health. Because over time they may begin to doubt and they begin to question God even. That has occurred. It's fairly common in people who are going through really difficult challenges. But we know that there is a mind-body connection, and so we know that there are principles, again, spiritual principles for maintaining health and for achieving health and achieving healing. You know, that the healing is natural to the body and to the being, and so there are things that we can learn and that we can live and realize. It's achievable. Health and healing is doable. It's doable. A sense of fulfillment in life, like the other two, they're rooted in spiritual consciousness. And there are known things that we can do in our lives, ways we can live our lives, spiritual principles even that we can apply that in living them themselves bring a sense of fulfillment. But there are other things like simply our family life or making a difference somehow or somewhere in the world. So we can find fulfillment. It's doable. Health, happiness, sense of fulfillment. Three things that I think no one would argue as not being key or key desires for most or many people. And I believe that the great teacher, way shower, elder brother, Jesus Christ, spoke to all of these. And through his teachings, he was very clear and very specific as to what it is that one would do to step toward health, happiness, and a sense of fulfillment, and what were the things that one needed to steer away from or around that will not take you there. And, you know, there's a sense that everything that he taught was about the inner man. Everything that he taught was about raising consciousness, awakening spiritual consciousness, and to allow us to learn to take responsibility for living those laws, those principles, those ideas that lead to and cultivate a sense of health, happiness, and a sense of fulfillment. Now, Myrtle Fillmore is a person that I haven't talked much about, and I maybe need to talk more about her because, again, the more I delve into her life and who she was, she's just an amazing woman. And Myrtle Fillmore, if you don't know, along with her husband Charles, were the co-founders of Unity, the Unity movement. And she was a very intelligent lady, avid reader, studied things. She was born in 1845. She was a graduate of Oberlin College. She went and was a teacher for a number of years. Very well thought of, highly regarded by parents and their students. And anyway, her health became an issue and a challenge in her life. She contracted tuberculosis, and back in the 1800s that was a very common thing. A lot of people died of tuberculosis. And she was a young woman, and her life was threatened. She even came close to dying. And so she said that she got no relief from the physicians of that day, and so she was searching and looking. And a turning point came in her life in 1886 when she and her husband Charles attended a lecture series that was being held in Kansas City by a man named Dr. E.B. Weeks, and he had come from the Illinois Metaphysical College. He was giving a series of lectures, and when they attended those lectures, she heard some things in there that basically about the laws of consciousness that she really hadn't been exposed to quite in that way, and the power of thought. And it captured her. It grabbed hold of her. She began to understand some things about what was happening in her life and why. She was inspired by it, and she was led to apply what it is that she learned. She went on from that and really learned more and applied more around that. And she had a complete healing of tuberculosis. That was no small thing. And in a period of months. And she realized that she had acquired a belief from her youth, actually, that she had inherited ill health. In other words, she was sickly, she was vulnerable, she was susceptible to always getting sick, always getting this or that. In fact, her parents would say, "This is Myrtle, our sickly one." You know, that essentially, you know, so that she got impregnated with, "I guess I always get sick, I'm going to experience ill health," and so forth. But she tracked that down. She tracked that down. And she tracked it down as a result of being exposed to some ideas and some teachings that said, there are ideas that we accept that will take you down. All right? And she grasped hold of that. And she said, and there are many letters, because she, you know, in her work through the years, their prayer ministry, she would write sometimes 2- and 3-page letters to people who would write in for help. And she would teach them in the course of a letter regarding what it was that they were going through, what they needed to know. So she was very, very thorough. So there are lots of letters that exist from some of the things that she has shared. But in one of the letters, she said, "What restored me to vigorous health was a change in mind from the old carnal mind that believes in sickness to the Christ mind of life and health." And then she quoted scripture, "Be ye transformed by the renewal of your mind. As he thinketh in his heart, so is he." So she was quoting the things that spoke to her. She maybe knew and had heard, but now she heard and they spoke in a new way, had new meaning. She went on to say, "I applied spiritual laws effectively." And that's a big statement. In other words, we can hear about a lot of spiritual laws, but do we apply them, and do we apply them effectively? She said, "I was thorough." And that's what she's saying there. "I applied spiritual laws effectively, blessing my body temple until it manifested the innate health of spirit." She came from the place that the spirit of me is whole and complete. And somehow I have to put the envelope of my body over that and reflect the spirit into all of me. And she blessed the cells of her body and things. And so not only did she bless her body temple, but she applied these spiritual laws, and it made a difference in her whole personality. She was more vital and alive and joyous a person, and people noticed that she was different. Her personality was different. She showed up in a whole new way. And she even began to build consciously joy and happiness into her consciousness. And she wrote, she said, "Joy is light. Joy sends its shining beams throughout the consciousness. It dissipates all discouraged, doubtful states of mind, all fear and apprehension. And when you tune your consciousness to the notes of joy and harmony, your body temple will respond wonderfully, and you will experience the freedom, the lightness, the health that you long to express." She made that not just stuff she was talking about, that she made that her experience. She was coming from the experience of a transformation that she had by virtue of being able to talk about that. And so Myrtle and Charles Fillmore, they eventually started to publish a magazine. And this was in 1889. And the magazine was called Modern Thought. And it really brought together all the teachings, really, of East and West. They were familiar with Buddhist teachings, Hindu teachings, Theosophical teachings, Emerson's teachings, Thoreau. But first and foremost, at the top was the teachings of Jesus Christ that were presented in the most positive and practical way in terms of the inner workings of one's consciousness, what Jesus was trying to take humanity to in the internal transformation. And she was very, very emphatic in all her years about God as being an indwelling presence. All right? That God is not off there in the sky somewhere or another, but God actually dwells within you. And that was very, very important and to her and what she taught. And she taught that Jesus was a highly evolved human being who was conscious of the indwelling presence within himself, and that he was seeking to be an example of what is possible for each and every individual who activates and accesses that indwelling presence and lives its truth to effectiveness. And so she believed that Jesus was with you always, ever with you, helping you to awaken the spiritual powers that God placed in all. She talked about it as the Christ mind, that the Christ mind was like a field of energy, a field of intelligence that was always there to access, so Myrtle, then, having grown spiritually and having had a healing herself, and really even a transformation of personality that brought this joy and everything to her, she then threw herself into what brings an ongoing sense of fulfillment. And that is she threw herself into a life of loving service of others. And that fed her for the rest of her life. And it became her life's work, she and her husband Charles. And it was called Unity. And they emphasized the awakening of spiritual consciousness through various practices that people needed to apply effectively. And those practices included disciplining the mind. Basically, you had to get to the place where you became a conscious, awake, and aware, and notice what you're thinking, so that you could begin to discipline that. Because thoughts have power. And they found tremendous results and healings and all kinds of transformation in people's lives as a result of helping people come to that place. But they also, as part of the practices that they emphasized, were things like developing intuition, that the voice of intuition is actually the voice of the divine, that indwelling spirit trying to speak to you. And so they helped people cultivate and distinguish that inner voice, that still small voice, the voice of intuition. And they taught affirmation, affirmative prayer, declarations of truth. And denials. The use of denials was to deny anything exterior to you as having power over anything that is of God within you. And there were statements like that. And they used prayer, of course, they emphasized, and meditation, and emphasized love and faith, and imagery, use of imagery, and living in the moment. All of these things were practices that were important that they taught. And they taught what unity meant. And they emphasized what unity meant and stood for. And it stood for oneness. Oneness with God, and oneness with Jesus Christ, oneness with their fellow man, oneness with all life, and the importance of that. And therefore, they essentially taught, because we are all one, whatever we do to help another in their health or happiness or sense of fulfillment is really to help us all, because we're all interconnected. And they taught that, and they understood that way back there in the late 1800s. Anything that ties you to the source, as the arms, the legs, the heart, the voice of God toward good, will bring a sense of fulfillment. And so it's for all of us to know that as a soul, each and every one of us is employed by God. By God, you're employed by God. All right? You're employed by the universe, by life, by the Creator that put you here. And the truth is, therefore, no one is ever unemployed. You may not have a money-paying job, but you are still employed. All right? And how you show up and what it is that you are doing and how it is that you are being is important, because you are still employed by God, by the universe, by life, by God. Okay? So one of the universal laws is, as you sow, so shall you reap. And as you give, so shall you receive. And so nothing can stop us really from giving then. Because we can, even though we're not doing really well financially, we can give kindnesses. We can give time and talent. We can do things like that. There's always something we can be doing and giving and extending. The measure of light and life and love that we shine on into the world will be the measure of how much is being reflected back. That's the law. That's the law. So we are here then to be really, in truth, the arms, the legs, the heart, the voice of God, to expand the goodness of God, because that's how it gets shared. It's through you and me. It's how it's done. We don't stand by and say, wait for the presence to do it. The presence moves through people as co-creators to do what needs to be done. Okay? So we can create division or we can create oneness, and you can see both all over the world. And which do you want more? And what works and what doesn't work? And so that's where you get to see those who are people who are still learning and those people who have got it. They got it and they're working on it. And they're offsetting those who are in separation by living in states of oneness. And so you all want to be one of those who are contributing factor to the oneness that offsets the separation. Do you not? Do you not want to be employed in this manner? Thank you. Thank you. So to be on purpose with our lives is to find a place and a way to serve. All right? Dharma. Dharma is a word, it's a Sanskrit word that means purpose in life. And the law of Dharma says that we have come into manifest form as physical beings to fulfill a purpose. And the role we have as a soul is really to surrender our spirit in such a way that the divine is able to work and move through us for the purpose of good and bringing good in us and through us. Deepak Chopra, who was here recently to speak, he's written many books. One of his books that he's written some time ago was called The 7 Spiritual Laws of Success. Okay? And it says there, he talks about in that book 3 components of the law of Dharma. 3 components of the law of Dharma, this Sanskrit word. And he says first is that, the first law of Dharma is that you are here to discover your true self. To find out that you, in truth, are a spiritual being, okay? And that is your true self. And second component of the law of Dharma is that you are here to express your unique talents and abilities. And so you are to find out what they are and then to put them into action and share them, express them. The third component of the law of Dharma, he says, is basically and simply service to humanity. Service to humanity. And he says that the question one must ask again and again is, how can I help? How can I help? How can I help the world? How can I help my family? How can I help this person, that person, whatever? And granted, there has to be balance in this, because I've seen people that just get wound up only and just, so worrisome about everything. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about where you're called, where that intuitive voice says to show up with your unique talents and abilities. And you'll know where you need to be in a healthy way. How can I help? And Chopra says that when you combine those 3, to know that you are a spiritual being and know your true self, and then to know what your gifts are, and to combine that with then service is you are fully into the law of Dharma. And so the question for all of us is, how can I help? And that's a question really that our spiritual self, our true self, would ask. Again and again, it's that part of us that would say, how can I help here? How can I help here? Not, how can I be more a part of the problem? We wouldn't ask that. That's some other voice. In fact, the ego voice will not ask, how can I help? The ego voice will say, what's in it for me? What's in it for me? And in all the religions that I have studied, and all the spiritual paths, and all of the masters and mystics and teachers that I have, my little eyes and mind and heart have cross the path of. They have all emphasized really what I see to be two things. Always come to the top, at least two of the three things. Always love is talked about universally. And the other, I keep finding everywhere, is service. They keep saying service. All these highly evolved beings, all these teachings and writings about the essence of what it's about. Love and service. It's undeniable. Seva, S-E-V-A, is a term that is used in the East to mean spiritual service. Okay? Seva is a spirit of love going on. And the understanding of the reality that there is a oneness that exists. And it is a recognition that the self that I am is the same self that you are. Okay? And that when I help myself, or when I help another self, I'm helping myself as well, because we're all interconnected. And there's that knowingness. That's a part of seva. And seva is giving, therefore, without restriction. It is without calculation, and it is without any need for recognition. That's seva. Okay? And it's a feeling that comes over one that wants to give out of a kinship with God, and that everything they're doing, they are feeling, and it's coming from a kinship with God, and a kinship with recognizing that everyone in all parts of life are a part of them. It's all God. And granted, it takes a while for all of us to get there, but it's good to know that that exists. And that's where we're going? Yes? It's where we want to head. Okay? And so Martin Luther King Jr., he was quoted as saying, everybody can be great, because anybody can serve. That's what he meant, because there's greatness in service. And I think he was piggybacking on something Jesus said, and Jesus said, whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant. In other words, you'll never be great until you've learned to serve. That's where it begins. And he used the parable of the Good Samaritan. And, you heard that. You're familiar with it. It was a lawyer that popped up and said, how do I inherit eternal life? And he said, live the commandments. And commandments were, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. The other was to love your neighbor as yourself. Then they said, well, who is my neighbor? And then he went into the parable. He told about, the guy who was beaten and left for dead in the ditch. And there was a Levite and a priest, and they saw him and did nothing and went the other way. And that there was a Samaritan who found him and went the extra mile, did everything, beaucoup kindnesses, okay? And Jesus used a Samaritan in his story for a reason, because in Jesus' time, Samaritans were not thought well of. They were a despised people. They were half-breeds. They were looked down upon by the elite of society. They were people who knew what it felt like to be beat up and robbed of one's dignity and everything else. And yet Jesus was saying, here's a Samaritan that, in spite of that, knew his oneness with all life. In spite of that, he didn't let that turn him from being who he was in needing to be of loving service to his fellow humanity. It's a very powerful story. We were recently on a pilgrimage to Concord, Massachusetts, and we studied the experiences of the transcendentalists of the 1800s, and people like Thoreau and Emerson and Alcott and Margaret Fuller, and it was a great experience. I got to see where Emerson grew up. I got to see the house that he lived in, and I got to learn more about them as well. And I found that Emerson to be really a giving, a generous, compassionate person. He helped his buddy Thoreau through a lot of hard times, where Thoreau didn't know where his next meal was. And there were some hard times going on back then, and he really helped him out, and he helped a lot of other people out, I came to discover. And one of the beautiful statements Emerson has said is, he says, it is one of the most beautiful compensations of this life that no man can sincerely try to help another without